Good morning again. It's Thursday, April 15th, 11:15 a.m. This is the third segment of Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee meeting today. We're turning now to the ship Adirondack and the scuttling of it. And it originally was brought to our attention by Senator Benning as it came through some language related to this proposal, and a permit that's been issued for it came through the capital bill. Senator Benning called it to our attention. We've taken some testimony on it, but we hadn't heard directly. Well, Senator McCormick, who serves on institutions, said probably the best thing is to hear directly from the chair. And so we've invited Senator Benning in. So Senator Benning, could you share with us the thinking you had on this issue of mutual interest to the two committees?
Sure. Thank you for the invitation. For the record, Joe Benning, Chair of Senate Institutions, also representing Caledonia County. The Institutions Committee is responsible for brick and mortar in the state, which actually does include the bottom of Lake Champlain and all of our waterways. The Institutions Committee is responsible for something called a capital bill, and I'm bringing all this down to the 10,000-foot level for the benefit of anybody who may be watching on YouTube that is totally unfamiliar with this process. One of our sections in the capital bill, which is the document that we allocate money out to various entities, deals with historic preservation. And specifically in that category, underwater preserves, which includes all of the hundreds of wrecks at the bottom of Lake Champlain. When the counter committee in the House, known as the House Committee on Corrections and Institutions, passed over the capital bill, there was one sentence contained therein which sort of stood out in my mind as a very large red flag. And that sentence is very simple. It simply reads, "The agency," meaning the Agency of Natural Resources, "shall not authorize the reefing of the MV Adirondack." Now, to explain that a little bit, the Senate Committee on Institutions was alerted about a year and a half ago about a proposal to sink a I believe it's 113-year-old ship called the Adirondack. It's a ferry boat that has been on Lake Champlain for the past 63 years. Prior to that, it was up and down several places on the East Coast. But this ship has been in operation with the Champlain Transportation Authority, ferrying cars across the lake back and forth. The ship has reached a point where they need to take it out of service. And the question was, what do you do with it? There are options, of course. You can sell it for scrap. You can try to preserve it on land. And at this point in its life, being over 100 years old, there are some arguments to make that it is actually an historic structure. There's another possibility, however, and this is the possibility that was brought to our attention, that it would be purposely sunk in Lake Champlain in order to have it become an artificial reef. There are two aspects to that. One is that the ship itself might become a place for aquatic wildlife to hang out, if you will. The other is that it might be something advantageous to the diving community, and as well folks who take boat rides for the specific purpose of investigating historic structures on the lake bottom. And we heard testimony that that was the proposal, that it would be sunk for that reason. We've taken a lot of testimony from various witnesses. When the bill came to us from the House committee, it stood out like a sore thumb because no capital dollars have been requested for this purpose. In fact, the only way that the capital bill would come into play would be in the future because historic preservation maintains certain sites on the lake bottom that require things like buoys or signage for the purpose of maintaining the historic nature of this particular structure. But right now, for the purpose of sinking the ship, that there is no request whatsoever in the capital bill for any money. So for the House committee to suddenly decide they were going to direct the Agency of Natural Resources not to allow that to happen struck me as quite odd. As luck would have it, at the time they made that decision, the Agency of Natural Resources was still in the permitting process of trying to decide whether to authorize the permit. Since that sentence was added, the agency has in fact allowed that permit. And the other entity that was involved in the permitting was the Army Corps of Engineers, which had the responsibility of deciding whether or not there was any nautical obstruction that might be involved. They had already issued the permit when the House committee had decided to go where it did. So our committee, the Senate Institutions Committee, voted 4-1 to strike this language from the bill. I sent it over for a topic of conversation to this committee because I do believe there is a responsibility of the state to make sure that anything that is being deposited in the lake bottom be carefully considered, and perhaps a discussion should ensue about what specific rules should be developed whenever this occurs. Now, let me say there actually are some, I won't call them formal rules, but some idea of the agencies about what is proper and what is not. Ships have been requested to be sunk before, and the agency has said no. But in this case, they said yes. I do believe that there is a need for clearer rules on how that decision is made. And I believe that eventually those rules should be reviewed by both institutions and Senate Natural Resources and Energy, as well as the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, to make sure we're all comfortable with how things will proceed, whether it be a total ban or a specific decision on each proposal is yet for discussion. So I come here today to alert you that the Committee on Institutions has voted 4-1 to remove that language from the bill. I had understood from Senator McCormick that there were people on this committee that might be concerned about the decision. And believe me, I am sympathetic that the bottom of our lake should not become a junkyard for facilities, but it is a little, let me rephrase that. It is necessary to take into consideration what the agency has required in this proposal. Every single item on the ship that had anything to do with either electrics or the mechanical operation of the boat has to be removed. There are some materials on the boat that have to be removed by way of plastics and whatnot. But the bottom line is the boat is expected to become literally an inert piece of steel. I'm sure that there is paint attached to the boat that may have, through the next centuries, come off bit by bit. But the Agency of Natural Resources has determined that is not a problem whatsoever for water quality purposes. So in the granting of that permit, now that the House has this language contained in the bill, if we were to pass it as a legislature, it triggers a whole nother level of conversation, because we as a legislature have ceded to the agency the ability to make these decisions. If we now come along after they have made that decision and revoke what I believe has become a vested interest in the owners of this ship, we have another problem that we have to face, in that we are injecting ourselves into a decision that's already been made. And these folks now have a vested interest according to the design scheme that we've set up for them to make that decision. And I will liken it to my world. I work as a criminal defense attorney. If an individual goes through the criminal jury process and is found not guilty in that process, for the legislature that set up that trial system to come back later and say, whoops, we made a mistake. We don't like the fact that you're now acquitted from the charge. We want to decide differently. That is totally unfair and unconstitutional as far as I'm concerned, that the legislature would have vested a criminal defendant with that right and then suddenly backtrack because they didn't like that particular decision. That's really the long and the short of my testimony, although I'll pause to note this committee is very familiar with VNRC, and I'm speaking of John Groveman in particular. There has been communication with our committee and John. John was surprised when he first learned that there was no money associated with this in the capital bill. Having said that, he has not yet made a decision over whether to appeal the agency's granting of a permit. So that discussion is still in the works. But at this moment in time, for this sentence to remain in the capital bill is very problematic. And I'm hoping that the Senate does not become embroiled in a conversation about whether they like that particular provision or not, because it opens up a whole can of worms that I don't think any of us have any real understanding of the implications of what we would do ex post facto, telling the agency that they couldn't have made that decision. I think that pretty much covers all of my bases. I do see Michael O'Grady on the screen, and he's been also involved in having this looked at from a legal perspective. I did send a copy of his memorandum to Chairman Bray. I don't know whether that's been delivered to the committee as a whole or not, but I'll pause there and see if I can answer any questions.
Thanks, Senator Benning, for that very helpful summary. Yes, so everyone in the committee got a copy of the O'Grady memo that you sent over to us a couple of days ago. So thanks for sending that on. While Senator Benning is with us, do committee members, I think one thing that's very helpful to me is that you filled in some pieces of the puzzle that were missing prior to today, and that is, for instance, that there is no appropriation, and that the sentence was added prior to a permit being issued. So those seem like two important pieces of information that we weren't aware of before. So let me pause and see if members of the committee have questions for Senator Benning in particular. Right. For us, I'm thinking as a committee, we have the immediate situation in front of us, the Adirondack, and then we have a prospective interest in how these things are managed after resolving the Adirondack. So I want to disentangle those two things and pause and ask Mr. O'Grady if he has anything to add, amplify, challenge, whatever, about the characterization that a permit having been issued, it would be questionable in some way if the legislature were to act, in essence, to revoke a permit.
So under 1 VSA section 214, there's a provision that says legislation shall not affect a right accrued. Why don't I just read it to you? I don't have it committed to memory. The amendment or repeal of an act or a provision of the Vermont statutes shall not revive an act or statutory provision, and it shall not affect any right, privilege, obligation, or liability acquired, accrued, or incurred prior to the effective date of the amendment. So a permit authorization is a right or a privilege, and it was incurred prior to any effective date of legislation you could enact unless you not withstood this provision and applied it retroactively. And at that case, then there would be something called the vested rights doctrine that might come into play. Now, the vested rights doctrine traditionally has been applied to land use development, but the Vermont Supreme Court in 2019 applied it to stormwater water quality permitting. So there's a good argument, and the rationale that the let me step back. The Supreme Court has decided to follow the minority rule in the vested rights doctrine, which means that an applicant for an authorization, their rights in the law vest at the time they apply for the permit, not at the time that the permit is issued. The majority vested rights doctrine is your rights vest when that state entity, that actor gives you something to rely on, and you take an action that relies on that. So they issue you a permit and you take some sort of action, investment, etc. That's when your rights vest under the majority rule. That's not the rule in Vermont. In Vermont, it's when you apply. And the court has said that the reason for that is so that applicants have reasonable investment-backed expectations, that they're not subject to retribution from the entity that oversees that activity if that entity wants to somehow punish the applicant or take away their permit. And basically just fairness. They said it's a fairness issue. So if the vested rights doctrine was applied, and I'm not sure it would be, but if it would be, it has been applied to water quality, it's been applied to the PUC. If it was applied, you'd probably have an argument that the applicant's rights vested when they applied, and that if you were trying to undo that, it would be retribution, and that it would be unlawful. Basically, the court would apply the law that applied at the time of the application. So, and you have a potential appeal, according to Senator Benning and email communication I've had with John Groveman. And so that's another provision you would have to not withstand, because that appeal likely would need to be filed probably before you adjourn. And then you would have to not withstand that legislation doesn't affect pending suits. So in order to address the ferry, you have some legal hurdles that you would need to navigate. No pun intended.
Right. So in the case of Vermont, the Vermont Supreme Court using the minority rule, even prior to the issuance of that permit on March 25th, when the House drafted that language, it was challengeable,
right?
Because they had already made a complete permit application.
Right.
Okay.
And that there's the it's called the diverging diamond case. That's the actual name of it, the diverging diamond. It's the AOT diamond in Colchester, the traffic pattern. And in that case, the court never actually got to the they dismissed the case because the appellate didn't raise the vested rights argument on appeal initially at the lower court, but it wrote into it like basically, hey, this fairness and equity and expectations for the permit applicant is the basis of our application of the minority position on the vested rights doctrine. And I think you have a fact pattern here that the applicant could say, hey, we went forward with what the law was at the time. We got an administratively complete application in. We did everything that we were supposed to do according to the US EPA and US Maritime Administration guidance for the sinking of reefs. We've stripped the ship. We're going to fulfill. I think you've got an equity and vested rights issue here if you try to legislate the Adirondack ferry.
Okay, great. I this time of year when everyone's getting caught up, I just want to make sure Senator Benning if we have more questions, if you want to leave to go back to judiciary for something pressing, feel free to go. I don't see any other questions, but you're certainly welcome to stay till we get to the finish line. I think we're only going to do 5 more minutes on it because we have one more piece of business before we adjourn this morning.
I'd just like to dovetail, if I could, Chris, off of Michael's statement. I completely agree with him that at the time of the application, in my eyes, these rights vested, but this is not law yet. You are coming in after the fact. If we pass this legislation, you're coming in well after the granting of these permits and well after the application of these permits. So I think it strengthens the argument of who would end up being the plaintiffs if they were suddenly deprived of the right to follow through.
Sure.
Right. And you would have to retroactively apply whatever legislation that was enacted. And you'd have to deal with due process issues and separation of powers issues as well. So it would be interesting to do, and I would have to work on it to try to figure out how to do it. I can't say that it can't be done, but I would have to really work at it to do that.
Senator McDonald?
This is all very interesting. Is there any legal way that we could say we've looked this over and we do not object to what the agency has done, but we believe that in the future, were they to have similar applications in the future, that the rules be established on how the rules be established.
Yes.
Yes. And if if there's any way to say we bless retroactively what has taken place, but we'd like to have rules available in the future, can we write that, and would this be a good bill to put it on, or should it be somewhere else?
I can't really opine on if this is a good bill to put it on or not. Germanus is the secretary's purview.
Skip over that.
But you can definitely write a requirement that A&R adopt rules for either just the encroachment of ships on the lake bottom, or for encroachment in general. They don't have rules for the encroachment permit program, to my knowledge, and that might be something you want explored.
Right.
Because you'll probably hear from advocates that the lake bottom as public trust land is supposed to be used for public uses. There are a lot of encroachment permits that you could argue are more private than public. Like, is a suction line for irrigation of a private field a public use? I don't know. But there's been a permit that's been issued for it.
So in directing the rules be written, it's been suggested that this vessel would be put in the lake for principles of like a museum, and would be
right. I guess my point is that there are other activities that may have a theoretically less public use than what is being proposed here. As Senator Benning referenced, it has recreational, historical, and potentially aquatic biota potential as public uses, but is a riprap wall for your private home a public use?
Were you advising us, or was there be a consensus that this has been done for, or is suggested that this is being done for a historical museum like underwater park, like other wrecks in the lake, and that rules be written that authorize putting things in for museum purposes, rules be drafted to do that. And then when the rules are drafted, we could, have a discussion of whether or not the rules reflect that goal. The silly suggestion would be, what if Shelburne Museum was tired of maintaining the Fort Ticonderoga and just wished to take it back over to the lake and sink it therein? It would be a similar request. But so there should probably be rules around that sort of thing.
So to Senator Benning, I think probably underneath there is a concern, right, that institutions has had this vote making a recommendation to the full Senate. And I think you're asking, will this committee support that recommendation in some way or another?
I guess I'm going to suggest it in the reverse. I just don't want this committee to come out in opposition to that request. Certainly people may have individual opposition and may wish to express that, but
right.
From the standpoint of the lake bottom, I neglected to add that there is no better custodian of the bottom of Lake Champlain than Art Cohen, who came to our committee and gave a very good explanation as to why he believes this sinking and reefing of this ship is a great idea. So any of you who may know him may want to have a chat with him just to be assured.
Okay. So I'm mindful of time. Senator McCormick, you had a question, and then Senator
Yes.
Campion.
Mr. Chairman, however we decide on what to do about Senate institutions language regarding the House language, going forward, I think it could be very simple. I would support legislation that just says the lake is off limits for dumping trash.
There's a lot of discharges to the lake that technically are waste underneath the water quality chapter. So we'd have to kind of maybe nuance that request a little bit.
Yeah. Well, you're the nuance guy. I'm the big picture.
Fair enough.
Right. Okay. Senator Campion.
Thanks. Senator Benning, the gentleman that you just referenced, did you say Art Cullen? And who is that?
Art Cohen. I believe he's the former director of the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum, is also involved with the lake in several different ways, and I probably should have brought his bio with me, but he championed letting the public in to visit some of the wrecks and maintain them through the Historic Preservation Division. So, for instance, if you decided you want to gather a group of friends and go for a boat ride where they have a remote camera that would enable you all to see what's on the bottom of the lake, he was behind all of those efforts, as well as making sure that they were being dove upon by people who were responsible in how they interacted with the wreck.
Thanks. I thought maybe he was an environmental person, and that's fine. I just was curious who it was. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I'll also add that Art Cullen has had a career as a public defender prior to his current biography.
Okay. So with that, because we do have one more topic to move on to, I'll jump ahead here, and I'd say we have 3 members of LCAR here, so we're probably very process and rule oriented, and maybe everyone is, but my take on this is that it'd be inappropriate for us to be weighing in on that. If we weigh in to the extent that we speak as a committee or as just with individual votes on the floor, I myself would support the position of the Senate Institutions Committee to strike that, because of the problematic nature of repealing, in effect, a permit after the fact. But I would like to follow up on Senator McDonald's suggestion about getting ahead of this and doing some rules that would address future instances. And then I would ask Senator Benning, you can think about this along with your committee mates, whether or not you would be willing to put that in the institutions bill, since the Adirondacks already in by name, right, in the bill. So probably reefing and sunken vessels, who knows what the Senate Secretary would call it, but it seems like it'd be likely to be germane. And that way, as you're saying no to one thing, you're also saying yes to something else, which is probably a positive way to come out of it.
Right. And I wouldn't have any problem doing that, Senator. And I also have two of my committee members are on this screen right now. I'm pretty sure the other person is perfectly agreeable to that suggestion. I'd like to thank you for what I thought was going to turn out to be a 3-hour tour, and see how many of you are actually able to date yourselves and understand where that phrase came from.
Senator McCormick, are you racing a 3-hour tour? No, I don't know that everyone's got that one.
Well, look up Gilligan's Island. You'll find out exactly where it is. And hello to Sue Minter, who I haven't seen in quite a while.
Right.
But I'm going back to judiciary.
I wanted to make sure you knew I got your reference.
Right.
Thank you very much.
That's sort of the outer limits of my television literacy. It's about Gilligan's Island era, and then I've lost it since then.
Senator McCormick and I are going to lease a ferry boat for people to be aboard to witness the sinking of the ferry in question, and Senator McCormick's already writing the lyrics for this the song in commemoration. So thank you.
We'll call it the minnow.
Okay.
Very good. Very good. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Benning. Thank you, Mr. O'Grady. So, Senator McDonald, could you work with Mr. O'Grady, since it was your good idea to get the rule writing provision started? Thank you.
Yes.
Great. All right. So with that, we're turning back. We are dotting I's, crossing T's, making edits to S109. We had a conversation earlier. Well, we had several conversations with Capstone throughout the session, and one of the provisions that we discussed, and I think the committee was very interested in, but we're doubling back to it now as we tidy up our work. And that was to consider hearing about expanding the ability of Capstone and your fellow agencies to provide counseling. We've been calling it kitchen table counseling. I'm not sure exactly where it occurs, but for people in a more holistic way, so that we're not just talking to them necessarily about weatherization alone, but that it's within the context of all the financial considerations they're facing, and that would include transportation, which is one of the areas that this committee would very much like to make a contribution on. And to date, we've done, I think, too little on transportation, so we'd like to make a start. Can you talk to us about your proposal to remind us of what's going on and how we might expand those services, and then give us a price tag that we could consider building into 109?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it was interesting to listen to the previous conversation. I don't want to think about how many bridges might be at the bottom of Lake Champlain. But anyway, so I appreciate your bringing me in. For the record, I am Sue Minter, Executive Director of Capstone Community Action. And with me also is Liz Scharf, who is Capstone's Director of Community Economic Development and Food Security, a very big job these days. And we are here to discuss a strategy that we really appreciate your thinking through. As you know, Capstone is one of 5 community action agencies throughout the state, and we work as a network. And really while we're each independent, 501c3s, we have overriding missions to help meet people in crisis through poverty, and help people not just get through crisis, but to get out of poverty. And we do that through a range of strategies. The biggest thing that you work with us on is home weatherization, low income weatherization. The community action agencies are really the operations team across the state for your program, serving folks at 80% median income. What we know is we like to think about all of the opportunities for improving people's lives while we have them involved with us on one service. So we've been thinking a lot about helping people out of poverty and combining that with our overriding goal as a nation and state to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so we became involved in, for me, unusual transportation, because when I took on this job, and I think you all know I once served as the Secretary of Transportation, I also served on the House Transportation Committee with the honorable member from Cambridge, who really mentored me in so many things. But one of the things that I don't think we thought about in those many meetings was how much transportation is a barrier to helping people out of poverty. And I could talk at great length about this, but the reason we're talking about it today is because I think we can be doing two things. We can be helping people achieve mobility and access to meeting their needs, whether it's getting to work or food or healthcare, while reducing our environmental impact. And you know, we have a huge push towards electric vehicle transformation. And when the governor proposed a subsidy for electric vehicles, we came forward, and frankly, your committee across the hall championed our proposal to help low-income people get subsidies for used hybrids and high efficiency and electric vehicles that they could afford. So that program is now underway. It's called Mileage Smart. And again, I think just yesterday or the day before, your committee across the hall embraced investing in this program again. And in fact, believing in us even more, that we could deliver more. So why are we in this conversation with you? Not only that you want to think about transportation, but I know you concern also about equity. And we know that when we are in people's homes to implement weatherization programs, we're really confined to the what we're paid to do, which is primarily just weatherization, cleaning out homes, basements and attics, and doing the basics to help that family reduce their costs and their impact in the environment by consuming less. So we know we're doing both of those things in weatherization, but we aren't talking to them about the other needs that they have and the other opportunities to both save money and help the environment, like transportation. One of the things that we have learned in our Mileage Smart program, that's the subsidy for used hybrids and high efficiency cars. We know that when we work with our families, they need a lot of support to understand finances. They may not have a bank account, have no relationship with financial institutions. They may have never really learned about budgeting, basic finance. They don't have capital, they can't borrow. So when we're trying to help them get into a used hybrid with a $5,000 potential subsidy, we sometimes can't get off the dime because they don't have the capacity to get out a loan. And that's when we turn to Liz and her shop. Because they have Capstone, and Capstone is only one of 2 of the community action agencies that have a financial coaching element. They can help and do help hundreds of people actually go from fear of thinking about and talking about their money to having a trusting relationship and helping people out of debt, helping people establish credit, helping people get loans and finance cars and even homes. That's what we do in Capstone through the financial coaching program. So our proposal to you today, and I think you all know, I believe, Paul Zabriskie, who I think just emailed out proposed language, is to have a pilot program to invest in all 5 of these community action agencies to develop what we're calling finance and clean energy coaching pilot program. Invest in us for the next 3 years, perhaps through your ARPA funding, to each of us employ one financial coach who is trained not only in those abilities to meet people where they're at, to address their challenging finances, but also to learn about the opportunities for clean energy, to save money, to help the environment, and to help their own finances. We think these can be really, we can do more when we train and deploy throughout the state in each of the 5 areas, a team, a network, which is really reaching out to the people we meet when we're at their homes. We won't probably be meeting with them at their kitchen table, but there'll be a warm handoff to those financial coaches who now will have a new program of training around the energy, the clean energy programs that you are also working to implement. So that's the beginning. I hope that was helpful, and I'm happy to answer questions, and probably Liz can tell you a lot more.
Great. That is very helpful. And it feels like a long time ago already, but when Ms. Sharp was in before, we heard about people getting 7-year loans and 17% interest rates on vehicles, and some really regrettable situations for folks. So to me, I'm really delighted that you're coming back with a proposal, and to me it also dovetails with the 3 legs on the stool we're building around weatherization. You know, it's the money, it's the workforce to do the projects, and it's the counseling piece that does the outreach and education to help the implementation take place. And so this feels like it makes an important step forward for the people that I think we are most concerned about serving in the program we're developing. So, with that, I don't know, Ms. Sharf, if you have anything you want to add?
Sure, yes, thanks for having me. Liz Sharf, Director of Community Economic Development and Food Security at Capstone. I'm also an accredited financial counselor and have done a lot of financial coaching work prior to my position right now. And I still continue to do financial coaching work with clients that I've had over the years, and I maintain that relationship with them. I think, you know, what I also want to add, there's a couple things I want to add. One is that a lot of the clients that we work with are also not homeowners. So low-income people live in apartments, but, you know, hopefully those apartments are also going to be in the weatherization program. So, you know, we're reaching out to not just the folks who are getting their, you know, the single family homeowners, but also a lot of folks that we meet with on a regular basis who could benefit from the coaching and information that we can provide to them, in particular around changing their driving habits, and as they transition from, you know, an old beater, having the opportunity to get into a more fuel efficient car is one of the goals that we do when we're coaching folks. I just want to share a little story with you that just happened this week. I have a long-term coaching client. She's employed, but she has had to cut back on her work due to some health issues. And I've coached her for probably 2 years. She is someone who has struggled with her credit for a long time, but has worked extremely hard to improve her credit. And that's through working with her debtors and making payment plans and figuring out a new student loan repayment plan. And she recently met with me. It was, I think, just last week. And she said, okay, so my car, it needs to be inspected and it's going to cost a lot of money to get it inspected, and I'm done paying it off. And now I'm thinking, do I, figure out how to get the money to repair it, or do I think about getting a new car? And I was like, well, we have this program called Mileage Smart. And I talked with her about that. And I said, your credit isn't great, but it's not terrible. And I believe if you work with your credit union that you already have an established relationship with, and you explain that you're working with a financial coach, you explain that you need a new car, that I think you're going to get that loan for a green car loan to be in the Mileage Smart program. And literally a week later, she is driving away, texting me wildly and excitedly saying, I have a new Prius. Well, new to me, it had 22,000 miles on it. She got a loan through Vermont State Employees Credit Union for 5.4%. And I'm telling you, I'm not taking the whole credit for it because she did all the work, but we really did work with her over the years to help her get to that position. And it may just be one person, but it's not. I just sent an email to another client of mine who reached out to say, we're going to need another car. Like, can you help us with, we can't really afford another car. What do you think? And I'm like, check out the Mileage Smart program. You're income eligible. You need the car for work. This is a perfect opportunity for you. And it really does boil down to sort of one family at a time that we're working with to help them transition to cleaner choices that they make in their family budgets. And it's not just cars, it's things like it's weatherization. So I do, I'm always saying, get on the list for weatherization. It's going to help you with your fuel bill because you're paying a lot of fuel. It's with things like, appliances. Like let's talk about like getting a new appliance, but spending maybe a little bit of extra money for something that's going to be use less energy for you. So I just think that the opportunity that low-income people want to be a part of this movement, right? Like they want to contribute to a cleaner economy. And what we don't want to have people say is, I can't afford to do that. Like, that's not me. Those are the rich people who can afford to have this. We don't want that message to be sent. And that's where, if we can have these coaches who are schooled, not just in personal finance, and part of this is going to be training people in real accredited programs so that they are learning the most up-to-date information that they have and are constantly being educated and getting, continuing education credits, but that they're also working with, our weatherization team to make sure that they understand where are the incentives, where are the tax credits, where are the rebates, so that we can guide them in a way that works for them and their families.
Great. Well, that's so kudos to Capstone for the piloting the program already, and I appreciate the proposal to help take this pilot to another level, make it statewide. We always want things that work well, make sure that every Vermonter has access to them. So I really appreciate that. I also want to thank Senator Westman for helping me keep an eye on this issue and making sure that as we do our energy work, that we keep on pushing ourselves to be more comprehensive and more equity oriented. So to actively seek out opportunities that address income inequality and social inequality that relates to income. So it's very helpful. So we have a proposal from you. I'll make sure that I'll ask Jude to circulate it to the committee. We'll be editing the bill tomorrow. And I know that we're a couple minutes past 12, so I appreciate committee members staying on. We have floor at 1. I don't want to tax people's patience here. Any questions for Ms. Minter or Ms. Scharf while they're with us? Okay, so thanks so much for coming back in. Thanks for taking our earlier visit and turning it into a proposal. And with that,
Thank you for bringing us in this whole issue of equity. It's complicated helping people with low incomes, and it really takes a lot of time and energy. And thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much for your consideration. To me, this is really exciting, and I hope you guys think it's exciting too. So thank you so much.
we do, but we're just a calm bunch on the screen.
That's why you have
Okay.
me.
All right. So thanks very much.